Welcome back. I'm Barry Craig. We are now well into the primary season. On the Democratic side, we have delegates and superdelegates. On both sides, we have open primaries, we have party primaries. What's a voter to do to figure this out? With me today to discuss this is Cale Sullivan, a student here at the college, a student not only of college subjects but also politics. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's start with the Democrats. Does a superdelegate wear a cape and fly through the air?
No, not quite. Superdelegates are elected officials such as members of Congress, Democratic members of Congress, Democratic senators, House members, Democratic governors, as well as party elected officials such as state party chairs. And there are a couple who are yet to be named as superdelegates who are elected by state executive committees and that sort of thing, who are completely unpledged. They can go and support any candidate. They can go and call up someone such as, say, Senator Clinton and say, I'm for you, Senator Clinton, I will be behind you all the way at the convention, and then get to the convention and change their mind and support Senator Barack Obama of Illinois.
How many superdelegates are there approximately?
There's approximately about 750 superdelegates out of the 4,049 delegates right now who are going to be at the Democratic National Convention in Denver in late August.
So if this election, this primary election season, remains close, those superdelegates could be the kingmakers in this.
Absolutely, and that, according to all indications, that is what's likely to happen. Because Hillary has her campus supporters and Barack has his campus supporters, and those equal out to about 50-50. In order to stop a primary contest from going to a convention, a candidate must attain 62% of elected delegates. This is 62% of the 3,300 or so that are elected by people like you and me. So in order to, and it's the way it looks, nobody is going to be able to get 62%
No, I can't imagine that.
of all delegates.
So if you are Senator Clinton or Senator Obama, how do you go about schmoozing these superdelegates?
Well, you can do a lot of things. You know, the ethical way, I suppose, would be to sit there and try and persuade them. You know, try to convince them how you share their beliefs on certain core issues. The unethical way would be to approach a superdelegate and say, you know what, I think you'd make a really great ambassador to Sri Lanka.
But they will be reaching out to these people and trying to line them up.
Absolutely.
Well, my guess is that a lot of superdelegates will remain maybe non-committed until they see how things are going. Will there, let's say, for example, that Obama or Clinton were to pull ahead. Would that cause a piling on effect with superdelegates trying to go with a winner, do you think?
It can. Say you are a superdelegate, just for sake of argument, we'll go with Representative Gene Green of Texas, and say that Obama wins the Texas primary and wins Gene Green's congressional district overwhelmingly. It would be hard-pressed for somebody like, say, Congressman Green to go against the tie of his district and support another candidate. So the better a candidate does in superdelegate or in the primaries.
Right. The more superdelegates they're apt to get.
Absolutely.
Right, right. Now, why don't the Republicans have superdelegates?
Well, they do have a certain mechanism. They will generally pick, I know Kentucky will pick 3 delegates at the party convention, but 3 delegates out of the 45, I believe, that the Republicans have in Kentucky or so. 3 delegates doesn't really make a lot of difference. Now, in some of these states, such as California, they have 441 delegates they will be sending to the Democratic National Convention. Out of those, 71 will be superdelegates.
And of course, in the case of the Republicans in Kentucky, the 3 that they would elect would more than likely be major political figures in the state.
Senator McConnell, Senator Bunning,
Right.
Possibly someone like Secretary of State Trey Grayson or Congressman Hal Rogers.
Right. Now, in Kentucky, of course, our primary is in May. It is a party primary. Democrats go to one, they vote in their primary, Republicans vote in their primary. Other states have crossover primaries, do they not? What are the arguments in favor of, say, a party primary versus a crossover primary?
The arguments in favor of a party primary are that it allows Democratic or Republican Party members to go and select the candidate that they prefer. It's a closed process, but it's one that allows the people who truly support that party, the yellow dogs of both parties, to go and have a greater say in choosing who their party's nominee should be. It rewards party loyalty. Now, crossover primaries, as we have seen in 1960, I believe it was, the 1960 presidential election, something like 60% of all ballots cast were straight party, either straight party Democrat or straight party Republican. In the last election that we had, that number became 24%. The American political landscape is de-aligning and it's becoming more independent. People are willing to go and cross parties in order to vote, and a lot of people are deregistering as Democrat or Republican and becoming independent. And what a crossover primary does is it enfranchises voters. And this one is that there's an open primary and then there's a more open primary. Some states will just allow independents to go and pick, or they can just go and register as a Democrat and vote in a Democratic primary and then deregister as they walk out the door, and their vote still counts. Other states will just allow, just same day registration. You can be registered as a Democrat, but you can register as a Democrat on the same day. You don't have to go and do like what we have to do in Kentucky, which is change your registration prior to by December 31st of the year before the election.
Well, in the case of a crossover primary, let's say, for example, you were running on the Democratic ticket, and I figured, this Cale Sullivan, he'll be easy to beat, so I will get a whole boatload of Republicans to vote in the Democratic primary to get you on the ballot so we can beat you easy. Do things like that happen?
Yes, they can. One instance of that was Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, no longer a member of Congress, represented the Georgia 4th Congressional District. She was very, very far to the left. She could have easily been a member of the Green Party. And her district was solidly Democrat, so there was no chance that Republicans had of ever defeating her in a general election and electing a Republican representative from that district, which is located in central Atlanta. So what the Republicans did, because Georgia allows crossover primaries, Republicans can go and vote in a Democratic primary. They went and supported a local judge in 2002 by the name of Denise Majette. And she had enough support anyways from conservative Democrats in that district and got the Republican support to go and defeat Cynthia McKinney in a primary and take that congressional seat.
So that would be perhaps an argument against the fact that you could stack it up against a candidate when you really aren't of that party, actually. We talked earlier about in the state of Montana, they have an unusual primary arrangement. How does that work?
Well, it isn't a primary arrangement as much as it is a caucus.
Right.
What they do is take it back to a smoke-filled room, we might say, and they go and have this is what the Republicans do in Montana. They have all of their Republican elected officials from state rep, governor, all the way down to county clerk. Any Republican elected official, they go and get the Republican Party chair. They go and get the Republican Party state executive committee in Montana. And they go and get the county committees and the precinct committees. They get them all together and they go and vote. And whoever has the most votes gets Montana's 24 or so delegates.
Do the Democrats do that in Montana also?
No. Democratic Party rules as passed as part of the McGovern reforms in 1971. There is proportional representation in Democratic Party primaries. Previously, Democratic Party primaries would often be winner take all. If you won by one vote, it didn't matter if you won by one vote in California or 1 million votes. You got all 173 delegates or so. It would have been the 1968 contest. And that's what Bobby Kennedy did do. And it's a shame he didn't get to use those delegates. But that was the way that the process worked. Right now, it varies. Some states will allocate delegates by the statewide vote. Others break it down by congressional district. But either way, if you get 15% either in a congressional, and in Kentucky we do it by congressional district and statewide. if you get 15% in the first congressional district, you will get a delegate to the national convention in Denver. And there's probably about 20 or so that, or 20 or 30 that are allocated that way. Then there will be like another 15 that are allocated statewide, to where in order to reward strength statewide.
Going back to the Iowa caucuses, how do they function? People hear the Iowa caucuses. How do they work?
Iowa caucuses work. Everybody who is in a voting precinct can go to will go to caucus, and people off the street can go into a caucus. It's pretty much voting by appointment, and they get together, and it's also a very public process too. If you're
It's like
a Clinton
the old
supporter,
town meeting over in
Right.
New England, yeah.
if you're a Clinton supporter, say in the Iowa caucus, or an Edwards supporter or supporter of any candidate, and you know that all your neighbors and friends are supporting Senator Obama, you have to go before all your friends and neighbors and publicly declare your support for Senator Clinton or Senator Edwards or whoever. And the concern becomes viability in these caucuses. You will get, as we saw in 2008, we saw people gathering. We saw 300 to 400 people in some of these precincts getting together and standing in different corners of a room and decide. And if a candidate, say someone such as Governor Bill Richardson or Senator Chris Dodd, Senator Biden, say if any of those candidates did not have the 15% in a precinct, then a person would go around, usually the chair of that caucus, and would declare that that candidate was unviable, and would offer the supporters of that candidate a chance to go and realign with another campaign.
That's pretty complicated.
Yes.
Yeah. You mentioned a minute ago about ticket splitting. Something else that has fascinated me is, as I tell my students, American democracy is evolutionary, not revolutionary. You go back to, we try to open the system up. We dropped the voting age to 18. It's one person, one vote now, no property requirements. We instituted primary elections, the theory being that it's better for the rank and file Democrat or Republican to choose the candidate than the party bosses in the smoke-filled room. Having said all that, there has been a steady decline in voter participation since then. I was talking to a former colleague of mine about the famous 1840 election, the log cabin hard cider campaign, which is totally issueless, but huge voter turnout.
Something like 85%.
It was 85% exactly. You go to the 1884 election between Cleveland and James G. Blaine. Where's Ma, where's my pa? Gone to the White House, ha ha ha. Cleveland's accused of fathering illegitimate child, and so on. Huge turnout for that one. But yet today, the system is as wide open as it's ever been. There is more information out there for a voter than ever before, but yet the turnout is abysmal. Any reasons, any opinion as to why that is so?
Well, we've seen a lot of changes since 1840 and 1884. Back then, every business was closed on Election Day. It was a largely agrarian society. Nobody's going to really be tied with growing. Nobody back then would have been tied with growing any crops in November.
And something else, I think politics were entertaining back then. You see accounts,
yeah, a lot more personality.
You see accounts of Henry Clay giving a 2-hour speech and people staying for the whole thing and laughing appropriately and booing appropriately. Can you imagine a politician giving a 2-hour speech today?
Wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
Well, a good example of this, and this just change has happened in the last 40 years. In 1968, when Hubert Humphrey was running for president, and he would have been on the nightly news, because nightly news would have been covering that, and this was a 15-minute nightly news too.
Sure was.
Would have gotten at least 1 minute of a stunt speech or something that he had that day, completely uninterrupted, showing on the news. This was the average. So, some days we've had 30 seconds, some days we've had 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Today, that number or in the 2004 presidential election, that number got down to 8 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
A candidate could expect 8 seconds on the nightly news covering the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And voters are being left out in this process.
That's an interesting point. A number of years ago, former Governor Julian Carroll was on the program, and of course, Carroll is sort of the last of the old-fashioned stump speakers, where these guys, they lived and died on the stump. They were tremendous orators. And I asked him, I said, Governor, what killed that? And he said, television did. You can't tell a story in 8 seconds. And it totally changes the nature of politics.
Politics right now is all about sound bites.
It is. It is. And of course, in Kentucky, in the old days, a sound bite was a good chomp on your opponent's ear in a fight.
Right.
That's totally changed.
Chet Lyon style.
Exactly. And it's and I think all this is caught up in this. I did get a humorous email I'm going to share with the viewers. Talking this before the program. It came from my wife's cousin, who's a retired Baptist pastor. And the question was, do you suffer from ED? That is erectile dysfunction. In essence, it's a pox on both their houses. I mean, after all this hue and cry, a lot of people say, I don't like any of them on both sides. I mean, do you get a sense of that out there in the just talking?
Well, I know that the Republicans are very unsatisfied with their presumptive nominee, Senator John McCain of Arizona. Even very far to right-wing reactionary conservatives, such as commentator Ann Coulter, have went and said that if McCain proves to be the Republican nominee, she will go out and campaign strongly for Senator Hillary Clinton.
Wow, that's amazing. That is astonishing. And again, going back to the Democrats, you have this horse race. We were talking about this before the program. When is the last time we had a genuine horse race going into the convention? And it's possible, if these trends keep up, neither one of these candidates will have the 62%. Now we're close to it. When's the last time we had a really competitive convention?
Well, the last time that there was a contested convention for Democrats would have been 1980 with
Ted Kennedy.
But
even so, Carter, even there,
it never got beyond the first ballot.
I mean, Carter clearly had the edge. But what I mean is where you go in there and it could go either way.
Well, there was 1976 for the Republicans with then former California Governor Ronald Reagan and incumbent President Gerald Ford. Mm-hmm. That was going into that convention. Anybody could have seen what could have happened, but it never got beyond the first ballot. Last time we've had a convention go beyond the first ballot was the 1952 Democratic Convention, where Adlai Stevenson was nominated. Last time Republicans had one go beyond the first ballot, I believe, was 1948 with Thomas C. Dewey of New York.
Well, I mean, I'm 58 years old and been following politics for years, and I can't remember one. These conventions basically are where you go and wear funny hats and throw confetti and get drunk or whatever you do. There's nothing really that goes on there. They're more coronations.
Most of it is mindless party exercise.
But it's fun. But they're coronations rather than that. All you're simply is actually.
And the worry for Democrats is they find themselves in positions like they did in 1972 when they go and nominate George McGovern. He got nominated on the first ballot. But the convention was so contentious. The vice presidential nomination went on for several ballots. You had several people who, I believe, first place for 1972 vice presidential nomination was Senator Thomas Eagleton.
From Missouri, right.
Right. Second place was a failed candidate in the primary for governor of Texas named Sissy Farenthold.
Remember that? Sure do. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
These things... And what happened with McGovern is he wound up making his acceptance speech. Acceptance speeches usually take place in the current format. They take place around 8:30 in the evening Central Time. George McGovern made his at 3 o'clock Eastern. Nobody was awake to watch his acceptance speech, where he can go on for 20 minutes about all the great things he wanted to do.
Right.
And he never got a convention bump, and he ultimately lost by one of the greatest margins in American history.
He did. I remember the 64 Republican convention. Wasn't that the one where Governor Rockefeller made the obscene gesture with the telephone? Do you remember that one?
I thought he made the obscene gesture when he was vice president.
Well, the one I'm thinking, maybe it was in the Republican convention, and they took his telephone away from him, and he flipped a bird or something. I don't know, but so these things can get entertaining sometimes. But most of the time, they really are boring. I mean, both conventions, you get people giving speeches, and what always is interesting to me is someone is up there orating at length, and their people are asleep, reading newspapers, flipping paper wads. They're paying no attention.
Or people yelling like Richard Daley. And, Abe
Oh, now
Riddick.
that of course was that was hot stuff in the '68 convention with the tear gas coming in from all that.
Right.
But these things are pretty sedate, pretty boring affairs, except this year. And it's going to be really interesting now. Who are the Kentucky superdelegates that we know of?
Well, Governor Steve Beshear will be one. He is undecided. State Party Chair, Democratic State Party Chair Jennifer Moore is undecided. Terry McBrayer is a Clinton delegate. I believe Joanna Wycliffe is also a Clinton pledge. Representative Ben Chandler of Lexington is undecided. Representative John Yarmouth of Louisville is
he's for Obama.
Has decided to support Obama.
Well, now you mentioned pledge, but now again, when they get to the convention, because they decide
they can decide whatever.
Yeah.
If Obama decides to offer Terry McBrayer the ambassadorship to the United Kingdom, I can imagine Terry McBrayer might say, you know what, I really like Obama's health care plan now.
Yeah. But again, pledge is. Well, it's like a pledge to a fundraiser. You really don't have to give the money if you don't want to. I mean, you kind of think you will, but at least they're leaning in that direction. But again, it's one of the proposals I heard someone make was that the best way to solve this is to have a national primary on a certain date, July the 4th, whatever, where all the Democrats in the country go to the polls, all the Republicans go to the polls. Would that be feasible? Would that work?
Well, there are. I believe that would probably make the best plan, but the problem you're going to have is members of Congress from Iowa and New Hampshire. And Iowa, let's see, you have Senator Tom Harkin, who's been there since 1984. He's chair of the Agriculture Committee. Chuck Grassley is a Republican. If they ever regain control, I believe he would take control of finance. So any representative who will ever be putting a bill through either of those two committees is going to be very inclined to go and do that. And also, you'd have to question whether or not that the federal government would have the authority to go and impose that upon the states.
That's right, because states do have the power to govern their own elections.
It would alienate me. The proposal of such a thing would alienate many powerful members of Congress from both Iowa and New Hampshire, as well as other states such as South Carolina, where the House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn is from, Nevada, where Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid is from. These are not men you want to irritate if you ever have hope of passing any bill through Congress. But even if it were to go to the state legislatures, as we saw, even with the Democratic National Committee went and tried to establish a certain amount of order to this process. And as we saw, Florida went and jumped the gun and moved theirs past February 5th to the 29th of January. They lost their delegates. Michigan really jumped the gun and moved theirs up to January 15th. They lost all of their delegates. That's 370 delegates that will not be there at the convention unless something changes.
If they decide to do this, would the most feasible way be a constitutional amendment?
Either that or getting the states to enter a compact where they would agree to go along with this. But even then, Iowa and New Hampshire, a constitutional amendment on this would probably be the only way to guarantee that it's enforced.
And of course, the problem with that is, are these minor parties? What would they do? I mean, I guess they would, if you were a libertarian or a prohibitionist or whatever, I guess you'd vote on that day too for your candidates, I guess. But again, and people, I was talking in one of my classes about the British political system, where their elections are much shorter than ours. And
5 weeks usually.
Yeah, 5 weeks. People say, oh, that's wonderful. Wish we could do that. Wish we had it that way. And I think by the time that after all this hue and cry is finished, people are just tired of it. They're weary of it. And then and of course the nominating conventions, that's not even half the battle. Then the real stuff comes. So by November election day,
as we see in the current political climate, Elections start when the last one ends.
I know. And so how effective can you be as a lawmaker when you've got to have, you've got to be watching out for business, but yet you also have to be concerned about running for election?
Well, one thing that would probably help in this matter is, as we saw with President Bush, he has been very unsuccessful. Even Republicans would admit that he's been unsuccessful in passing any second-term initiatives. His first term, he was able to pass many bills, but because he was a lame duck in his second term.
And that's true of most presidents, isn't it? That second term is not as effective as their first, usually.
And part of that is because of term limits.
Right.
The 22nd Amendment is, as soon as the president gets reelected, his political career is over.
That's true. Republicans and
really, the only
Democrats,
purpose with a term limit system of even seeking reelection is just to stroke the ego and confirmation that you did a good job. It helps build a legacy. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's really the only purpose of even seeking reelection nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So on that topic, would you want to go back to no term limits on presidents?
Well, that would require the repealing of a constitutional
Right.
amendment. There are many people who would support putting term limits on members of Congress, but I feel that term limits, we already have term limits. They're called elections in this country.
Right.
Term limits constrict the voters' ability to be able to pick whoever they feel is most qualified to lead their country or to represent them in any legislature. Mm-hmm. And I feel that it's a very undemocratic thing to do. Now, some people would argue that this helps prevent corruption, but the thing is, if you go and say have a system like California does, where they members of the state assembly, the lower house, have are given a 3-term limit, so that third term, they know that they cannot run for re-election again. It's wide open. They can go and take any bribe they want to. They don't have to worry about consequences of any of their votes, any of their actions, because they know that their political career is finished anyways.
Now that's an argument I never thought of about term limits. Arguing against it is that the theory is it fights corruption, but yet on the other hand, that's an argument that it can also cause corruption. Mm-hmm.
And also causes legislators to make votes that many of the people in their district would be strongly against.
Right.
I think that it should certainly be examined to look at curbing back term limits. Mm-hmm. Because if voters feel that a president or a state legislator or a congressman or a governor has done a worthy job and deserves re-election, they should be empowered and have the ability to go and vote for that candidate for a third term. Mm-hmm.
And conversely, if you don't like somebody, there's always recall in some states, and that has happened.
And also in the case of presidents and governors, it makes their second term much more effective. The only second term governor we've had in Kentucky was Paul Patton, but his second term was pretty much an unmitigated disaster, to put it mildly.
Our program was an unmitigated disaster, but we're out of time.
It's just a mild disaster.
Just a mild disaster. I'm Barry Craig. My guest today was Cale Sullivan, talking politics. Please join us next time. Thanks.